It's a little slow. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about today is American Morse and the Continental Code, and how kind of we got to the Continental Code from the American Morse. Anyway, telegraph, as you are probably aware, was developed by Morse and Vail in basically Morristown, New Jersey, which is about 15 miles from where I grew up. The word telegraph was Morse's idea. Tele from far off and graphen to write, both from the Greek. Now, when they were inventing the telegraph, one of the first things that Morse came up with was what he called Morse Code's dictionary. And it was sort of an interesting piece in that it contained series of numbers that, which were sent like one dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots. Anyway, a number series of about a couple of thousand elements, actually, which contained standard messages that he felt would be the most logical way to send things. But it was, as they worked with it, it turned out to be extremely cumbersome because they couldn't really do that. And as an alternative, Vail actually came up with the alphabet and the number codes, and that was in 1838. And you're probably all aware of the way he came up with the alphabet and the number codes, right? He walked into a local print shop and he looked around and he said, okay, I've got dot, I can make things called dots and I can make things called dashes. So he looked around and he said, well, what's the block that has the most letters in it? And that was the E. He said, oh, so you send E's in the printed vernacular for English, you send E's most. So we'll make that the simplest because we send it the most. So dot. And then he looked at the next letter, and the next one, most used one was yet another vowel, and I. So, and so on. So he ended up working through that, and then the number codes and the rest of them came later. But anyway, he came up with all of those wonderful codes that those of us who speak American Morse are so familiar with. And actually, some of them are the same as Continental Code, about half. The numbers are mostly different. Punctuation is very different. But anyway, but Vail and Morse came up with a thing to copy their code. The original way they copied their code was on what Morse called a register. And that is a Morse register. And essentially, what it is, it's you wind it up. You can see the little spindle here. You wind that thing up, and it has paper that runs through the rollers and back through a little ink pad that moves based on the coils you can see in the back. And what it does is it actually marks on the paper as the little geared driver drives the paper through. It actually puts dots and dashes on the paper. Because what Morse felt was that it was absolutely mandatory that you get an absolute perfect rendition of what was being sent on paper. And so that's the way that they originally copied the Morse code. The bad news for that is, good God, look at how complicated that was. And remember, this is this is the 1840s. So making a machine like Morse's register was frightfully expensive at the time, very complicated, and it took quite a bit more time to learn to use it. So what happened was, as the operators got around for a while, pretty soon they figured out that they really didn't need the paper because they could tell what the Morse code was just from listening to the pen go up and down and hear the clacks of the pen go up and down. And so eventually they came up with a much simpler system. The other piece that made Morse's the most interesting thing, or one of the most interesting things to me, are the gravity cells. This is what made it all work. These are about 1.7 volts each. The max's current's about 250 milliamps. That's enough to drive, any of your local loop sounders. And remember, sounders were all different. And this battery was good for maybe 2 months before the zinc, this thing up in the top here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the thing up in the top that looks like a crow's foot or a bird's foot, that thing up there, that eventually melts away, and they have to replace the battery. The Local loop sounders were the ones that are run on short haul right there in the, in the telegraph office. And mainline sounders were one where you didn't have a local loop, you didn't have a relay, which will go over the equipment that does all this later. But anyway, the local loops are about 4 ohms, and mainline sounders were, for the most part, 120 ohms. And they were pretty smart folks. They figured out that if you balance the impedance on all of these things across the way, you actually got much more reliable results. Now, does anybody know how to tell the difference between a local sounder and a mainline sounder? Anyway, one is adjustable, the other is not. Local loop sounders are not adjustable, mainlines are. And the other thing they came up with was to make the sounder go were keys. Yay! So, I don't know, is that better? I don't know with you guys. Anyway, the one in the top left, that is Vail's correspondent. That's a replica of the original key that Vail came up with to send Morse code. Very primitive, but it works. The second one is the second one on the top, that's on the top right, that's a Western Union. It's called a legless. Now, the reason it's called a legless is because the connections to the key are actually on the top. On a normal Morse telegraph key like that, they actually have 2 very long bolts that make the connections, and they go through to the bottom underneath the desk, and the connections are made underneath the desk. Going to the bottom left, you go to my favorite, which happens to be actually one of my keys. That's a Vibraplex presentation from about 1960, was the year that was manufactured. And the nice thing about the bug and the Western Union key, which you'll see, is they both have a shorting lever. You'll see the shorting lever is over here. I don't know whether you can see my mouse on the upper right and the bottom right. And the reason that you close those is so you can listen. And if you were listening and copying somebody sending to you, and you want him to stop sending because you missed something, you break the connection or open the switch. Hence, break someone. That's how you break someone during a sending, while you're sending. And the last one is a picture of my Profi, which is a German-made paddle. I think that gentleman is now a silent key, but that's a very fancy and very nice, very, very nice iambic paddle. This is a sounder. This one happens to be a local sounder. If you look at the right-hand side of this, normally there would be a lever which would move the where the armature comes through. It moves the magnet up and down so that it gets closer or further away, so that as your telegraph wire gets wet, you can adjust it to make a better connection and a more reliable connection and sound out of the sounder. Anyway, most telegraph wires, in case you don't know it, were steel. Hence, if you read anything about telegraph sounders, when a connection was really, really, really good, they used to say it was copper, because copper wire was very rare, but it was a very solid and really a great connection made for really good listening. Now, the thing that sounder is sitting in is called a resonator, which helps basically direct the sound toward the operator who is listening. Now, some of you, or most of you maybe, have seen the pictures with the telegraph sounder with the Prince Albert can stuck behind one side or the other of this thing. Now, many people have asked me, it's like, oh, okay, because on a live demonstration, I have my own sounder there, which has a Prince Albert can in it. And they asked me, well, wait a minute, what's the Prince Albert can for? Well, it actually changes the sound of the sounder as the unit goes up and makes a click and a clunk. It's clicks and clacks. It actually changes the sound slightly, and that's what the Prince Albert can was used for, by placing it behind the front brace or the second brace, made it sound a little bit different, and that was really important if you were working in a telegraph office where there were more than one sounder going off. You wanted to be able to be sure that you could figure out it was your sounder and it was your wire that was going off. So anyway, hopefully that'll help you guys on that one. This is a telegraph relay. This was connected so that essentially all it did would have to move this little teeny weeny piece of metal here, not a big sounder, so that it would work. And then this actually made a connection here so that you could drive a local sounder. So that's what a relay is all about. There are a number of those. This one happens to be a 20 ohm relay for a, this was from a, oh, I'm sorry, this one is actually from a Bell telephone switch. You guys all know that up until DDD, direct digital dialing, direct distance dialing, that when you made a long distance phone call, there was a back channel on every telephone line that actually was telegraphic. And that's how they set up the connections to make your long distance communication back in the old days. So there you go. Now this is Morse code with a capital M, AKA the mother tongue, for those of us who are telegraphers and actually speak that language. And it has some really unique sounds to it. Remember, as I said in the beginning, in American Morse, you don't copy tones. You copy clicks and pauses. So let's go through the alphabet a little bit at a time. First is the A. That's an A. D. Like, oh, okay, those look kind of familiar. Those sort of kind of sound the same because they're the same in Continental Code. But then you get to the C. Wait a minute. Oh, yeah, C, that's a stuttered character. As you can see on the screen, it's stuttered. It's not exactly a whole pause, but it's not exactly a space. So it's stuttered. And you'll notice the C, the R, the Y, the Zulu, a number of the characters are like that. And by doing that, and by the way American Morse is set up, it's actually 15% faster than the Continental Code for sending English. Why? Because Morse code was optimized for sending English. But anyway, we'll go on to a little bit more. That's the D. E, as I mentioned before. F. It's like, wait a minute. Isn't that an R? No, that's an F. And then the G is the same. H. I. J. K. L. Wait a minute, that's a long dash. Please note, you cannot send American Morse with a keyer because they don't make long dashes. And then there's the M, which looks the same. N, O, another stuttered character. Ah, interesting. P, no, that's not a 5, that's a P. And then Q, more like an F, right? R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y. I like that one. And Z. Not bad. So you say, okay. Are you getting the picture here? This is what you're hearing is not you're copying the clicks and the pauses. So something like the word Morse sounds like that. Let's go here. Page 1. Morse also has a bucket and a half of punctuation. Because remember, they were sending everything over this. It wasn't just telegrams. They were sending press. They were sending baseball scores. They were sending, sports scores. They were sending stock market reports. You name it, it came over the wire. So they have just a bucket and a half load of all sorts of stuff that you won't find in the Continental Code. And you'll notice that, for instance, a question mark. Oops, gotta go back over here so you can hear this one. Question mark is, wait a minute, that's a / in Morse. Anyway, capital letters, small letters, how to capitalize. You have the shilling marks, pound marks, all that stuff. Whoops. You have the not code. You'll notice where it says a comma up in the, that's now, if you handle Morse code traffic, da-da-da-da is not a comma, it's AA to separate the elements in a radiogram. But back in those days, when they were doing telegrams by hand, remember that was a comma, and commas were used to separate elements of an address. Another one you might notice that many of you are CW operators, it's the AND symbol at the bottom. And you can see that that's ES for and that's used for AND now. So a lot of this stuff carried over and went through. And the big benefits of all of this is, as I think I've stated a couple of times before, it's anywhere from 15 to 20% faster than Continental Code for English. It has a really robust punctuation character set. The equipment to send and receive this is about as simple as it gets. And then you come to Phillips Code. Phillips Code was unique. The next time your kids or your grandkids tell you they got their act together, you know, with all these silly abbreviations on their phone with the LOLs and all that stuff, well, I have a book here called Phillips Code, which I actually republished. It's about 64 pages, and it has almost 2,000 abbreviations, which are standardized. And the Phillips Code was used by predominantly people who were sending long text, like newspaper print, stuff like that, news stories, stuff out of Parliament, stuff out of the White House, the Congress, all that kind of stuff that they were sending. Because what would happen is normally on those particular circuits, one operator is normally the transmitting operator and one is usually the receiving operator almost all the time. And so they would start with the Phillips Code book, and you start in the beginning, and you would start by using just the single letter abbreviations. And then you would go to the double letter abbreviations, and then the triple letter, and then on and on and on. And some of those abbreviations are still around today. A lot of times you'll hear them refer to the President of the United States as POTUS, you know, P-O-T-U-S. Well, that was a Phillips Code abbreviation for President of the United States. Same thing for SCOTUS and a bunch of other stuff. And those of you who handle traffic, you're probably familiar with the GG, which means going, TT, which means that, T, which means the, a number of things that you hear on a traffic net, you know, as you're being directed around to different frequencies and stuff like that. A lot of those abbreviations were carried over because a lot of the guys were originally Morse, you know, telegraph operators that then came over to the amateur radio side to use that. And the neat thing about Morse code was that it was in basically continuous use from 1838 until 1982, which is the last one. It was a 19 train order, type 19 train order that was sent from Montreal to, I think it was Ottawa, in 1982 on the Canadian, I think it was CP Rail, Canadian Pacific Railroad. So it was in continuous use for 144 years, which is not a bad track record for a code. The things which eventually killed Morse code is obviously you need trained operators at both ends, and getting people trained up to where they were very efficient took time and money and everything else. And it was a lot simpler to teach somebody to bang green keys than it was to teach them to actually be successful Morse operators. Anyway, so you're saying, well, wait a minute, if this code is so good and it's got all these really cool things, how come we went to the Continental Code? Well, a lot of the rest of the world was using Continental Code, so it was kind of standardized. The other thing about Continental Code is there are no spaced or stuttered characters. So guess what? It's machine sendable. Aha! The other piece is that it was also readable on submarine cables. And then here's some submarine cable fun facts. The first cable to England in France was done in 1854, and the first Atlantic cable was in 1858, and it was on the third try. By the way, if any of you are interested in a book that is really worth reading, it's called A Thread Across the Ocean by John Steele Gordon. It's all about Cyrus Field and how he managed to get the first, undersea cable across. It's an outstanding book. By the way, the other one that you might be interested in is a book called The Victorian Internet, which is by Tom Standage, and it describes basically all of the same things you're seeing on the internet now. Basically, they had on the Victorian equivalent of the internet, which was the telegraph. Anyway, so we were talking about submarine cables, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, how come it's so much more readable on a submarine cable? Well, because the amount of current that was coming through by the time it got to either England or Nova Scotia was pretty faint. So what they had was a great big set of magnets like this driving a little mirror. And what they did was they put a candle and then later a lantern in front of it. And as the dots and dashes came in, they actually pointed it at the wall, and it would move the spot of light across the wall. And that's how they read the code. It was about 5 words a minute. So it was not particularly good. But the problem, if you have stuttered characters like the C, the R, the O, the Z, or the Yankee, the Y, that it looks like gibberish when this thing was coding. So they said, okay, well, that's not working so good. So they said, okay, who's got a good code that has more dashes in it, doesn't have any stuttered characters, and is a lot more orderly? So since I said orderly, you can probably imagine where the code came from. It came from the Germans, of course. Anyway, they had a very orderly code, which was very, very nice, as you can see from everything. But unfortunately, it is optimized for German. But since they use the same basic Latin alphabet we do, it's like, yeah, okay, that'll work. Anyway, so that's how come that went along. And then what happened after that was, guess what? Then came wireless. Oh, yeah. So when wireless came along, they had a couple problems because in the beginning, they were like, okay, trying to marry up the two codes was kind of not working so good. I mean, the first International Congress came up with, SSSDDD, which it turns out was the same in both codes. It's like for distress, but that didn't really work out so well. So in 1904, Marconi came out with using CQD, CQ distress, which is also something that was used on British railroad lines. So that was okay. And then the Berlin Conference in 1906 said, well, we really ought to be using SOS. So in 1908, they kind of came around and said, well, okay, internationally, SOS is going to be the distress signal that we're going to broadcast on the radio. But it really wasn't until 1912, actually, a bit after, in August, actually. But on April 14th, the Titanic, aka MGY, went down. And after that, he was trying to use both codes, CQD, SOS. He was trying, there were people on the coast copying him, but they speak American Morse for the most part. Anyway, to make a long story short, they said, okay, this is not working. So what they eventually came up with was they adopted the Continental Code as the international standard for all ships. And they said, okay, and they also came up with that SOS is the standard distress signal. The voice equivalent is Mayday. They also came up with another one, which was XXX, and that's an urgency signal. That means it's not distress, but not good. And TTT, which is a safety signal. Any of you guys have your second-class telegraph or your third-class telegraph? You're familiar with all these things because these are all part of the exam. And they also adopted a whole bunch of Q signals. And the reason they came up with Q signals was they wanted a way so that operators who did not speak the same language could communicate effectively through a bunch of Q signals for standard things that they would need to do to be able to pass traffic. So just for fun, I thought I'd put down some marine Q signals, which I would be surprised if many of you had seen. For instance, QOA, can you communicate on radio telegraphy on 500 kilohertz, the international distress frequency? QOE, have you received a safety signal? Remember the safety signal? TTT, from, by, what's the commercial quality of my signals? 1, 2, 3 was QOF. QOJ, will you listen on, that's a working frequency for signals of emergency position locator beacons. Have you received signals? Anyway, in the chat room, you can all sign up and tell me how many of you actually have worked at sea and understand that have seen or heard these signals before. Not to be outdone, and about, let's say 50 years earlier, the telegraphic guys came up with their own equivalent of Q signals. They were kind of fun. One, which was the weight, or the same as AS that you're used to. 1 3/4, who's at the key, very important, was 2. Do you have anything for me? That's QRU. The equivalent of QRU is a 5. I'm ready, which is QRV. That's a 6. Close your key. You're breaking others. That means, just close your key, shut up and get off. 9 was a wire chief precedence. Wire chief was the guy that ran each telegraph station. And do you understand? 13 is I understand. I don't know how they got that one, but whatever. Anyway, 18 was always like, okay, what's going on? 19 was standby for a number 19 train order, which is a standard hold, move, slow down, etc. train order. Number 31 is standby for a 31 train order, which is basically a manifest for a bunch of rail cars. That it's a railroad car, it's a freight train that's going through. Answer quick by telegraph, president's message, deliver promptly, and all that good stuff. There were other codes that came about with radio. The Navy, which was really weird. I tried looking through this, and basically they used exactly the same code for the M and the 9, the same code for the J, the V, and the 7, the same code for the B, the X, and the 0. It was like, this is really totally weird. By the way, it didn't last very long. There are all kinds of Morse codes out there. There's an Arabic Morse code. There's a Chinese Morse code. There's a couple of those. There's a Greek, a Hebrew, a Japanese, and there's a couple of Japanese, but katakana is the most popular one. Russian, there's a Russian Morse code, which I'm currently in the process of learning. And the evolution has continued because in 2004, they added the @ sign so you could send email addresses without sending AT over the air. Anyway, there's lots more codes. There's the one I'm currently learning. That's Russian Morse code. That's the Russian Morse, because at least I stand some semblance of a possibility of being able to make sense of it. The other code that's very popular that you'll hear on the air, especially out here on the West Coast, is that one. Get up early in the morning, about 3 or 4 in the morning, get on 40 meters, you'll hear a bunch of guys yakking away. You'll hear them saying, this is JA whatever, la, 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 la. And then they go into katakana, and it's like, wow, huh? So, unfortunately for me, my nephew actually speaks fluent Japanese, but my chance of learning Japanese is basically slim to 0 at best. So I kind of gave up on that and thought better of it. Anyway, I'm hoping that was a help. Hope you guys got a little bit of information out of that. It wasn't too bad, and I didn't take too long. So if you have any questions, I guess we can go into the, where's the chat thing? The chat room, I guess it is. Okay, I brought up the chat room. So if you got any questions, or I guess we'll let the moderator, I guess that would be Dan, go over this thing, and you can, actually, Dan, if you would field the questions, that would be great. Boy, I got no questions? Wow, I'm impressed.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Well, okay.
Well, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. A little bit distracted here on Long Island because we have a heck of a storm coming through here, the remains of Ida. But, I have on our website, the Long Island CW Club website, for the past 3.5 years, your Jay Leno video, which I found on the internet some time ago and really got a kick out of. And I have some questions for you. Was that rehearsed to the point where you were always supposed to win?
No, actually, and there's an interesting story on that. We had a couple of dress rehearsals, and the first one, we actually beat him with a straight key. And the producer came backstage and he said, "Ken, this is really awful. Those guys look so stupid." He said, "Can we do anything?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Make it shorter, take away the punctuation, don't give them any numbers, make it a little bit easier." And so he said, "Well, okay." And then he turned around, he started to walk out, and he turned around, he says, "Will you still beat him if we do that?" If he did, I said, yeah, we'll still win. I said, there's no way they can beat us. So anyway, so we went to the second rehearsal and we kicked their butt again. And after they changed the message. So Brian was very satisfied after that. He said, okay, I kind of get the picture of these. The kids can't win. So anyway, to make a long story short, you saw the results for the third one. And it was a lot of fun. The kids that we were competing against, I got a chance to talk to him in the green room afterwards, and the actual texter was really, really a nice kid. And he said he was like 2 words back before we were even done, and he hadn't even hit send yet. So to give you a little one up, I actually, when they told us what they were going to do, I actually looked up the world's record for text messaging and the message that they sent. And I then ran it through my code simulator to see, so that it matched the time that the world record was. And it turns out that the absolute world record was not quite 26 words a minute, which when we went to the final one, I told Chip, just set the gear to 30 words a minute and call it done. So no, there was no chance they were going to win. And, one of the other questions, I got an interesting question from Jay, I think it was from Jay. And he said, well, the kids on the text messaging, they use all these abbreviations. And I said, yeah, we have over 2,000 of them. If you let them use abbreviations, we'll use abbreviations. That'll make it go real fast. So he said, oh, okay, never mind. Just have them send the message.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken.
You're very welcome. The question is, what equipment will produce the clicks and clacks? A sounder. Or there is a program out there called Morse KOB. That will not only make the sounds that you're looking for, but it will also allow you to dial into the internet wires so that you can actually listen to real live Morse. There's a slow speed wire, there's a regular speed wire for those of us who are a bit more proficient in the code. There's a news broadcast where it broadcasts news. You can get the time. There's all sorts of stuff on there. So if you're really interested in American Morse, there you go. Yeah, one of the books was it's called A Thread Across the Ocean is the book, and the other one is The Victorian Internet. Another really great book, if you have the chance, is by Peter Matthews. It's called SIGINT. It's the story of signals intelligence during World War II, but it's from the German side and the non-Allied side in World War I, World War II, in between. Anyway, it's very interesting.
Okay, there's some hands up here. Oscar, you want to come on here?
Hey, Ken, beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
That's like number 1. Thank you. I do have a question when they have this first, like the gravitational battery or cell, actually. When they use the wires and so on, what was the maximum length from station to station that they were able to transmit? I'm talking about ground because the marine cable, that's another story. But what about on the ground with the cables?
You mean like a standard telegraph line?
Yeah. With
a 140 ohm sounder or a 400 ohm sounder, they'll go up to 200 miles.
That is interesting.
But normally it never went that far. Normally it was like 40 or 50 miles, and they used 120 to 100 ohm to 120 ohm. And normally that's because the wire was connected through relays, that thing that I showed you earlier in the thing, which just moves a little teeny piece of metal to make a connection to a local battery that would run a local sounder so that you could copy the traffic.
Thank you.
Okay, that sounds real good. Looks like, John, you got your hand up there. You want to come on?
Yep, I do. Let me turn on my video. So Ken, quick question. Start video. So one day this neighbor lady knocked on my door and said, "You're a radio guy, right?" And I said, "Yeah." She handed me this. And I'm thinking, this is a sounder or a relay?
That's a sounder.
Okay. So I guess my follow-up question is, I just need a battery with a few volts in here to to make this thing come to life in a demonstration.
Yep.
So this little J38 kind of looking key, and then this thing.
Yep. I remember you closed the shorting switch. Oh, and that was the other thing that's interesting about the chemical batteries that I showed you earlier.
Mhm.
They only work if you keep them shorted, if you keep the line shorted most of the time.
Oh, really?
It takes them a while to get up to speed and get up to current. But yeah, you just need a battery and off you go.
Cool. All right. I'll give it a whirl before our next demo on something like this.
That's the interesting
Hey,
part is mounted on too.
like I said, she just knocked on my door one day and handed me this. It was her dad's. So, and I keep it kind of displayed in the front room. But it'll help.
Okay.
Thanks.
K6ST, Barry, do you want to come on?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. Hey, Ken. So a ham friend, I've been a ham like 48 years, but somebody who's only been a ham since that thing you and the other guys did, he had never heard about ham radio. He saw that on Jay Leno. He says it's the coolest thing, some sliced bread. That's how he got into ham radio. So pretty,
Excellent.
pretty amazing. I have a question on the clack thing. Do you know when? Maybe you said it. When did it go from the clacker to the sounder to the buzz? Do you know when actually?
You mean when did it
the
go
technology change?
from the American Morse never changed. It's always been a sounder since about 1850. Because the original was that great big mechanical mess you saw, which recorded dots and dashes on paper. But that was so ridiculously expensive, and it was prone to all sorts of failures. Whereas a sounder, which is like about as simple as you can get, worked great. You can send American Morse, like over the air if you got a bug. Vic W7VSE, who's now a silent key, unfortunately, and I used to do that all the time. We actually used to send traffic to each other in American Morse over the air just to screw everybody up, just for fun. But you can do that, but American Morse sounds really weird over the air. On a sounder, it sounds normal to those of us who copy American Morse.
Yeah, when you were doing it earlier, I was listening and I was looking at it. I couldn't hear it all, but could be that Zoom was taking some of the clacks out of it. How do you get used to, or when you're copying it? I guess it's maybe no different than sound, but how do you map in your brain when it's a space? Like did it or whatever, the 2 dots and a space and 2 dots or whatever.
You get used to, just like you do with the sound of normal Morse, which is tones. You get used to the clicks and pauses so that that's an A, that's a B. I think Pierpoint described it in his book as oralization. Your brain kind of puts together this little block snippet of sound and starts to associate it with a letter. And then, as you get to copy faster and faster and faster, pretty soon you're not copying letters anymore. You're copying words, phrases. I don't copy letters anymore. Actually, when occasionally I'll get on and I hear some novice on, it's going like 10 words a minute. It is brutal to copy that because it is so freaking slow. And especially when you're used to, 25, 30 words a minute, which is my normal, speed that I like to operate at. If I'm on a paddle, I normally operate around 35. But normally on a bug, it's normally around mid-high 20s. But yeah, going from that, it's just really, really hard. But you get used to it. And there's a program available called The Mill that was put out by W4FOK. He's a silent key, I think, now, but that program is absolutely excellent. Wire your computer up to a sounder and off you go. It's an excellent program in teaching you to do that.
One other quick question, I'll let you go. I heard you talk about you got paid for the thing on Jay Leno. What I didn't hear is how you guys got introduced or asked to come on in the first place.
The producer, Brian, had seen the bit on Australian television that they had two telegraph operators against two kids with, text messaging on their cell phones. And obviously their, telegraph operators kicked their butt. So they wanted to do the same thing here. And so when Brian saw that, he called the Morse Telegraph Club. The president's number is on their webpage. They called him, and he said, "Oh, you want a Morse operator? Oh yeah, there's one local to you. Just call Ken Miller." So they called my wife, and that's how it all got started.
If it wasn't for the show and YouTube that you can see us all the time, it's so great. Thanks for doing it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. You got a question, Oscar?
Yes, I do, and thank you. What it means the term iambic, and what is the story behind it? Do you have any idea?
The iambic keying?
Yeah,
Um,
the iambic concept, because I believe it's more related to the concept.
Yeah, and it's really clever. Somebody came up with a method so that it minimized the amount of hand movement you needed to use once keyers got smart. Because my bug isn't very smart, but it will send American Morse. Keyers are really smart now. They will insert dots, they will insert dashes. You can do all sorts of crazy things with them. And so once the keyers got smart enough, they figured out, wait a minute, I don't have to use the standard motion that I've been using like on my bug for the last, umpteen years. Like my blue racer that I use all the time is the original bug that I bought in 1967 when I got licensed. So it's been around a while. But that's how that came up, and it is really efficient. As a matter of fact, I'm learning iambic keying with my left hand. That's what the Profi is actually for, so that I can write with my right hand and I can send with my left.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything in the text there in the chat?
Oh yeah, I see that 20 ohm sounders were used for local stuff. They were also used for I think one of my 20 ohm sounders came out of a meat packing house, actually. It went from the office to the meat packing house to go orders where it was only a few miles. The other 20 ohm sounders, a lot of them were used in those connections that I mentioned on the telephone lines. That's how they used them.
Interesting.
For setting up, long distance communications, long distance telephone calls. Do you remember the old days when they still had a real operator?
Okay, are there any more questions out there? Any answers? Oh, wait a minute. I see a hand up here if I can. Oh, that's Bruce.
Barry, I have another question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard you say something about cables and submarines. Did I understand that correct? That a submarine would tap into a cable?
Yeah, actually, that was done back in the 60s and 70s. But no, submarine cables are the ones that run under the ocean. That's the normal term for them, or called submarine cables. But
not just transatlantic cables, but submarine cables. I get it.
Yeah, they're just submarine. Anything that goes underwater is a submarine cable.
Right.
Yeah, although yes, submarines were used to tap cables.
So that's an underwater. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
This is Bruce with a question.
Okay, Bruce.
Thank you much. I can appreciate the classes or the presentation. Really nice. When I was taking a couple classes here, this thing about the Titanic came up, and there was two articles that I managed to find, and one of the articles talked about that somebody wanted to go down and get out the radio equipment, and they actually had I don't know, it was like the Titanic Society or something, and they okayed it. Okay, so they could go down. I guess they had some questions about, maybe what frequencies or whatever, and the poor old boat's just rusting away. So they did approve it. I'm just wondering if anybody's heard an update to that when they're going to have that expedition to go down there and try to retrieve some of that equipment. Anybody know?
I don't, but I mean, they already know exactly what was on that ship because it was all, you know, it's very well documented as to what the Radio Shack was. I'm surprised they want to go down there and do that. It's a
I may have
long
the answer
way
to
down.
Yeah, I may have an answer to that. I believe what I've recently read is that they're not going to do that now. There was, like you say, there was a project to go and retrieve equipment from the radio room, and I don't think that's going to happen now. There was the ship is deteriorating very, very quickly now as well. And the last expedition that was down there, and I think it's down at around 12,500 feet, something like that, is the depth. And I think the last expedition that went down and was investigating it found that the ship is deteriorating very, very quickly. So there's not going to be much of it left in a few years, apparently.
Okay, well, thank you for the update on that. I had not heard that, but nice to know. But I don't know, I kind of was hoping they would have gone down and, you know, found something of interest when they did bring up the equipment. But thanks, Dennis, appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. You know, there's the Antique Wireless Association. A couple of years ago, well, it's been more than a few years now. It was probably at least 15 years ago, maybe. They did a computer graphic representation of the Titanic radio rooms. Beautiful work. It was an article that was in their magazine, and somebody turned around and actually built a replica of the radio room. So there currently is a replica of the Titanic wireless room. It's, I think if you were to Google that or search for it on the internet, you'll find a lot of information about that. It is beautiful, beautifully done model. It's full-scale replica. It's not like a scale model or anything. It's beautifully done.
Oh, cool. And it's the antique, what did you say? I'm sorry.
Antique Wireless Association, AWA, Antique Wireless.
Thank you. Gonna write it down. Appreciate the information.
Yeah, it's a great group out of New York. Wonderful what they do. We've got a great museum back there too.
I Googled it. It looks like there might be a 25-minute video online. Some cool stuff.
Anyway, do y'all have any more questions on this? Or I think I've gone way over my time.
Lots of interest, lots of this has been a good presentation. Mike, you got your hand up there? KE4KIZ?
Yes, I do. And Ken, have you run across a tape called "Canst Thou Send Lightnings"?
I don't think so.
Okay, I have found a partial of what this was taken from a 33 RPM LP years ago. That was a commemorative pressing for the saga of telegraphy. It was for the honor of the birthday of Samuel F.B. Morse. And there's a partial copy of this recording on archive.org. And I know that it's not complete because I have a copy on tape of that pressing. And it's really pretty interesting. A lot of good code in it from listening to the sounders in how history went. And one of the things that's missing off of the stuff from the archive.org is when they were had to do with the Jamestown flood and the breaking of the dam. So that's how I know it's not complete. But it's pretty interesting to sit down and listen to.
There's an interesting side note for you guys that I don't know if you, for those of you who are out in California or have come to California and visited Disneyland, if you've been over to where the train rides are, that was an interesting story. When they first put in the train rides, you know, if you've been over there, you hear there's actually a sounder going off. You hear American Morse going off in at the train ride while you're waiting in line. And when they first put that in, that was really interesting. Everybody thought it was really cool. But they had to make a change to it. see, it turns out that Walt Disney's wife was a telegrapher. And when she went to the ride and started listening to what they were sending, it turns out they were sending dirty jokes back and forth to each other. So she didn't want that recording on there anymore, so they made a slightly different recording.
And life goes on, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Are there any more comments or questions out there?
In regards to that last comment, as Paul Harvey would have said, now we all know the rest of the story. That's funny. Thank you.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Didn't you have your hand up?
Oh, of course I do. I gotta say hi to Ken, and I'm really glad that he was able to make it here tonight and do this. I really appreciate your response to that request, Ken. So great to see your presentation again, and look forward to talking to you on Friday night, hopefully on the net. And by the way, I was going to comment about you're talking about the thing at Disneyland. You know what the message is? Was Walt's that he gave on the opening day of Disneyland back in 1955. And so that whole speech is on, or maybe it's just part of the speech, maybe it's just an extract, but I know it's from the speech that Walt gave when the park opened. And I think that's pretty neat.
Well, thank you.
Good to almost see you, Ken. You got to get a camera, dude.
No. It's sort of like you talked me into getting a microphone. I mean, cut me a break, dude.
All right. This has been a great presentation. Most of us has got the gray hair, which implies that we came up through the CW days. And so we have an interest, and a lot of us have the same keys and such that you have there. I know I do. It's just a part of amateur history, and it's part of amateur now. Okay, is there anybody else out there? I don't hear anybody. I don't see anybody. Let's try it one more time.
Yeah, Dan, I got something for you.
Hi, Al.
Give me a call when this is all over on the phone, because I got some questions for you.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with this program, but I just want to talk to you for a minute.
All right, Al. Well, I'm allowing you to break protocol here. Al is one of the local guys here locally, and we know each other pretty well. He's my lucky charm. When I go to club meetings and such, way prices, I always look for him. So I sit down with him and can win a prize. Okay, Barry, you get your hand up again.
Curious, Ken, are people using the older Morse clackety clacks? And if they do, how are they doing it? It's not on the. I'm assuming it's not wireless.
No, it was all wired, and yes, they're still doing it. And if you get Morse KOB, like I typed in the chat, Morse KOB, go there. It will tell you how to get your computer logged on, and then you can actually listen to the wire because it's real Morse code with a capital M, aka the mother tongue.
Thank you.
One of my mentors worked for Union Telegraph, I think it's called. Anyway, he could do 60 words a minute with American Morse Code and 60 words a minute with the. And I asked him, how the heck do you switch your head back and forth? He says, after a while, it's easy. It's just everything comes to you. But and he used to have a key strapped to his knee as he drove around town doing code. You talk about not wanting a microphone. He didn't want a microphone even in the car. So, okay, enough of all this. We all got stories. I do too. And I'm sorry to bore you with mine. Are there anybody else? Hearing none, I'm going to close this down and look for it on YouTube and all that out there very shortly. Ken, I appreciate again you coming on. You got a lot of neat things to say there. Hope to have you on again.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for having me aboard.
Very well, and thanks for coming on board. Thanks for Dennis for suggesting that. He's the one that brought you up, and the planning, the committee says, yeah, yes, let's get him on there. The rest is history. Thank you again.
Okay. Take
All right.
care.
73s, everyone.
73s.
7-3 all. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ken. See y'all
A
soon.
little later.
For those that don't know, to make sure you do know, after you close out of here, come back again and you just talk to each other like you kind of club meeting, whatever. It's just, I leave Zoom open for just that purpose. So you can just check back in here. 73s, see you next go around.